What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right. Welcome back, Nightmare Success listeners. I've got a treat for you guys today. So Seth Ferranti and I, we met up, actually Michael Henderson, who's actually on this show about, 3 or 4 podcasts ago. He texted me, he said, man, I ran into this Seth, man, you got to get a hold of him. This guy is, he said, he's lit. He's got all kinds of stories. So let me give you a little background of Seth, because I pulled this off of what he's, you look up Seth Ferranti on Google, you'll get a lot, but I'm going to give you just a taste of all this. When writer-director Seth Ferranti received a 25-year sentence, marijuana, LSD conviction, he was faked his suicide, landing him on the U.S. Marshals top 15 most wanted list. He thought his life was over. As a first-time nonviolent offender, the lengthy sentence attracted media attention from the Washington Post, Rolling Stone, Washington Times, and others. As a drug-dealing teen, Ferranti sold LSD and marijuana at 15 East Coast colleges, crisscrossing across 5 states, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Maryland. A wannabe rock star and Hunter S. Thompson-style outlaw whose heroes were Henry Rollins, Axl Rose, and Jim Morrison. Seth decided to rise above it all, above his past, and focus on his future. He began building a writing and journalism career from inside the belly of the beast. With unlimited access to criminals and their stories, Ferranti started crafting raw portrayals of prison life and crack area gangsters. Discovering a passion and talent for writing, Ferranti also studied the trade, earning an associate's, a bachelor's, and a master's degree while in prison. He took it one step further and established his brand, Guerrilla Convict. From prison, Ferranti became a true crime publisher and built a website documenting stories that the mainstream media was not willing to share. These stories reside in his books, and I think he wrote 22 books while he was in prison. Some of them were prison stories, Supreme Team, Street Legends, among others. He has over 500 blog entries written by him and other prisoners, along with hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of Ferranti wrote for other publications and websites. He became the most prolific prison writer of the war on drugs era. In February 2015, after serving 21 years, he was released from prison to seek and go into basically as a director and writer in the movies. And for any of those who watched that was either on the Stars Network or became a top 10 hit on Netflix was White Boy. And then later, White Boy Rick, which Matthew McConaughey played. He's appeared on Fox News, Inside Edition, News Nation as a subject matter expert, and is currently directing several documentary projects. Nightlife, which I saw the teaser to, which is very cool looking, is actually here in St. Louis, where they're actually walking the streets, and if this all comes out, it's going to catch everybody's attention. Seth Ferranti, wow, oh wow. Wow, man. Welcome.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you having me here.
So, Seth, all this is, when we had lunch and I pulled you up and thought, man, you have been on a ride. And I think the cool thing about what you've done is for a lot of people, 25 years in prison, and we're going to unpack all this, but 25 years in prison, I was sentenced to 5 years and served 3, and that was long enough for me. How you decided to make what you made in prison, I really want to get into that. But before we do that, I want to go back because I know that you were one of these kids because you're originally from California, but one of these kids that was kind of an Army brat that moved around. Can you explain a little bit about your early life growing up?
Yeah, my dad was in the Navy, so we bounced around East Coast, West Coast. I lived in Germany for a couple years. I lived in London, England for 3 years as a teenager. So I was kind of, like a typical military brat. I was always kind of on the move. And I think this upbringing kind of, set the tone, for my whole life, because always being the new kid, I was always looking for that acceptance. It was like, as soon as I found like a group of friends and I felt comfortable, we had to move again. So, as a kid growing up, especially as a young kid and then as a teenager, that can be unsettling because, I was just always looking for something, like I always had this, hole, in my life that finally, when I was 13, I started experimenting with cannabis and psychedelics and, this kind of filled that hole, and back then in the 80s, this is like, the mid 80s, 84, 85, right before the war on drugs and, this is your,
just say no.
This is your brain on drugs. And, there was this big kind of outcry and marijuana and LSD were kind of looked upon the same as heroin. And just from experimenting with these drugs and the way they made me feel, I really disagreed, with kind of the outlook because I saw this stuff. I thought it was therapeutical. I thought it was spiritual. Mm-hmm. I thought it was medicinal. Everything that people are saying about, especially cannabis and some psychedelics now. But I felt then because it kind of
you're kind of ahead of your time on that.
Yeah, it kind of leveled me out.
Yeah,
it kind of filled this hole. I mean, and obviously, I'm an older man now, so looking back, I can say this hole. It was basically like insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious, Seth. So when you got into that, was it easy to get into that? I mean, were you around a group of kids that you hung out with that's kind of what you guys were doing, and you got into that group? Is that how that worked?
Yeah, I really got into it. I got into the Grateful Dead scene. So that was kind of my entrance, into that world. And, it's funny, and I got a lot of friends that are like hardcore Deadheads now to this day. And
it doesn't go away, does it?
Yeah, but I always tell them, like, I was never like, I was never there for the music. I was always there for like kind of the counterculture.
Yeah.
That's what they called it back then. They called it the counterculture.
Right.
I mean, I guess now it's the mainstream.
Yeah.
But back then they called it. So I was there for the scene. And I gravitated, to those people. And that's how really I got all those connections. And then I was basically like, have drugs, will travel. Mm-hmm. I was like a freelancer. I just had good connections through the Grateful Dead community. I could get stuff sent wherever.
Yeah.
And I would just go to the colleges and sell it.
So when you got into the college scene, because I think it's interesting how, I mean, you were into some of the big colleges on the East Coast. How old would you have been at the time you were doing that?
Oh man, I was pretty heavy in the game by like 15, 16.
See, I think that's really crazy because, to be able to do what you were doing, you had to first find somebody to supply. You had to find, the distribution, getting, I don't know if you worked by yourself or you had other people you're working with, but you more or less put together a company. That's what I've always thought was interesting about the people I was with when I was at Leavenworth. The people who were in the drug business was very similar to the business that I had tried to grow as a national company, and that was, you've got a product. How do you get the product out? You got to distribute. How do you get the distribution? You got to have the sales piece. You've got to have incentives and commissions, and all those things that went with that. I found that a lot of the guys that I was locked up with, they had all that. They were just doing it from the drug side. But you were doing it at 15 or 16 years old. So did your parents have any idea that you were this guy?
I mean, they had their suspicions, but, really
because Seth, you would have been making money too. I mean, your parents had to see, okay, he's not asking us for anything.
Yeah, but really by the time I was like 16, 17, I had like my own place.
Okay.
I would... officially I was living at home and I had a room at home, but, I was never there. I had like a stash. I had places. And I was always the type of kid too, ever since I was 13. Like when I was 13, I was dating chicks that were like, 15, 16, 17.
Yeah.
By the time I was 15, 16, 17, I was dating chicks that were 18, 19, 20.
You were playing older.
So I was always, all my friends were older. I hung out with older people. Yeah. I was tall, I got, I guess I had facial hair pretty early on. Mm-hmm. So, I kind of looked older, and I played that role, and I was kind of acted older than I was. I was like that kid that couldn't wait to grow up.
Yeah.
So, I was doing all types of stuff, that, really people older than me weren't even doing, just because I was kind of bold, I was kind of reckless, and really I was just like, I'm going to do what I want. This is the life I want to live. I kind of saw myself as like this counterculture outlaw that was kind of bringing these substances that I called righteous mm-hmm. drugs, to the people, to my peers, to people in colleges. And all of this was kind of built, off that kind of Grateful Dead outlaw, kind of ethos that mm-hmm. was kind of out there, and I kind of just like rolled with it and became, like I say, I had long hair, but I wasn't like the, quintessential hippie or anything, but, I had long hair. But then the more successful I got in the drug business, I actually cut my hair short and I would dress like, really, really preppy because mm-hmm. I wanted to blend in with all the other college kids.
Yeah.
So, it was kind of like, I adapted really easily.
So, Seth, did you go to college, or were you just infiltrated into all these colleges?
I mean, I did. I went to, a couple community colleges, but I don't know, just like high school. Like, I didn't even graduate high school. I got a GED. Yeah. So, the whole thing was that because, like I said, I had always had places like before I was 18. And, my parents had this thing, like they try to put the hammer down sometimes, and they'd be like, you can't move out, until you're 18. And then finally, when I did turn 18 in January 1989, I was like, okay, I'm going to move out officially, even though I was already moved out basically. Yeah. But officially, I'm moving out, and then they were like, well, you can't move out till you graduate. That was my senior year. So what I did, I went out and I got a GED the next weekend. And that was crazy too, because like the GED test, they said it's supposed to take like 5 or 6 hours. I basically did the test in 2 hours. Like when I handed the lady,
that's one thing you haven't had a problem with. You are very smart, and how you've been able to apply that is fascinating to me. So you get your GED, then where do you go?
I went down to Florida, and I moved down there, under the pretense of going to school. But I don't know. I like college for the party scene, but like going to class, I mean, it was just kind of boring. I didn't really see how it would help me because, I mean, at that time, I was probably making like $20,000-$30,000 a month.
That's crazy, cash. Being at that age.
Yeah, so I was just like, and at that time, you're talking late 80s. I mean, that was like people's salaries for the whole year.
Sure.
So, I would go to college and, but it was always a pretense. I never applied myself.
Did you feel like you had like an entourage of people that were trying to feed off of that?
Oh, no, always, yeah. No, I had people that I fed basically. A lot of people, like they would sell for me or, most of the people I got, they were like friends. Like I recruited people into the drug business, like high school friends, relatives, people like that, people I knew in the West Coast and the East Coast. Yeah, I kind of recruited them in. And I kind of told them, boom, you're doing this. And then I would use them to insulate myself, so I didn't have to deal. Because at first when I was younger, like 13, 14, 15, 16 even, I was dealing with a lot of people, and then eventually I got where I would insulate myself and only maybe like 5 people or 10 people had access to me because I was bringing in so much inventory.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So this thing continues to grow. And when do you start, or I guess the real question is did you know that anything was coming down on you?
No, I didn't. I really had no idea. The war on drugs, I mean, in the late 80s in the suburbs, I mean, the war on drugs had just begun, so it wasn't something that we talked about. Mm-hmm. We knew, we read the headlines or we saw the news things about, the crack era stuff in the inner cities, because it was getting really violent, and it seemed like, to me that it was kind of focused in there and, they were basically, targeting, African-American people, which is, everybody can see now. But even back then, it kind of looked like that to me. So I thought, because of my upbringing and where I was and the color of my skin, I thought I was basically like untouchable.
Invisible. Yeah.
you know. And so, and I knew a lot of older guys that, you know, from the Grateful Dead community and older guys like weed dealers, like guys that have, you know, sold weed and even some even cocaine and like moved into legitimate business and had like these businesses, dudes that were like, you know, 10 years my senior.
Yeah.
So, you know, I kind of thought that's how you did it. You know, you made this illegal money and then you invested it into legit businesses.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my plan. But, you know, I also had a goal. My goal, you know, by the time I was 17, I had a goal. My goal was to become a cash millionaire.
Okay.
You know, I never got near that goal. I didn't, you know, like I say, the most money I probably had was a couple $100,000 at one time, and it probably wasn't even all my money. You know, I owed it, you know, because I got a lot fronted. But, you know, so I never came close to that goal. But
it's good to have goals, though.
You know, if
keeps you motivated.
Yeah, if I would have been out there, you know, I got busted at real young, you know, at 20. So, you know, if I would have been out there to the age of 25, if I would have had, you know, I had a real short run, you know, where I was, my actual run where I was actually making like 20, 30,000 a month, it was probably only like, you know, 9 months. Yeah. You know, before then it was just building up to that point.
To get to that point.
You know, learning, you know, establishing connections. So, you know, finally like 1920, I got to that point where I was like, man, I'm on. But it only lasted 9 months, you know, and then it
and you were only 20 years old. That's what's crazy.
It all came toppling down.
So can you walk me through, because you had a couple of different things that happen. You get tagged, but then you become a fugitive. Walk us into that whole thing. It sounds like a movie, by the way. That should also be scripted out by you on how all this happened, but that sounds like something you watch on TV.
So what happened was, in my case, this I wasn't even in the area, you know, but I was still sitting, and it was like you know, the summer of '91. And if anybody remembers back then, especially on the East Coast, like in the late '80s, early '90s, like the weed, it would get real dry because, you know, we were getting the good bud from Humboldt County, you know, the Emerald Triangle. Yeah. But that was like only in the fall. By December, January, that stuff would usually be gone. Mm-hmm. So the rest of the year, you know, I was hawking like, you know, I was selling like brickweed. You know, like people hear brickweed today, like they have no idea, like the weed that we used to get and smoke compared to the quality that we get today in this day and age. So the rest of the year, you know, I was basically hawking brickweed. And even in the summertime, like it would get dry. There would be like no weed, right? So, and I was always gearing up for the fall because I had the contacts in the Humboldt County. Mm-hmm. And I also had the contacts in Kentucky where, you know, a lot of people grow weed in southeastern Kentucky.
And I think you're doing a documentary on Humboldt County, possibly.
Yeah, I'm doing a doc series. But, you know, so I was always gearing up for the fall. I was trying to get my money up. So actually when this investigation started, I was actually in Hawaii for 3 months. Because I would do that too. Like I was the type of dude, like,
just take off.
I would do a load, you know, I would work. I would finish the load, you know, I'd be flush with money and I'd take off, you know, disappear for 3 months. Mm-hmm. So I was actually in Kona and I was in Hilo on the Big Island. You know, I stayed out there for 3 months. And while I was there, I was still, you know, funneling, you know, LSD into the area. And, you know, looking back, I made a big mistake because all my friends that were in all these 15 colleges in 5 states, they were all back in Northern Virginia. And these were all people that I kind of, you know, pushed into, you know, selling drugs. You know, some more than others, you know, but a lot of them I recruited in. Mm-hmm. And they would move my stuff. And they were all back, and we just saturated the area with LSD. And the area was so saturated, it was like, you know, this shows you how saturated it was. Is like, you know, at first, when I first started, maybe it might be 8, 10 to hit. And then, you know, when I got going, it went down to 5 a hit. And then in the summer of '91, when it was really dry and all my friends were back and we were all gearing up for the fall, you know, because we made a lot of money in the fall off of harvest with the weed, you know, I flooded the area with LSD and it dropped down to like $2 a hit because there was so much LSD. So all my friends were back there selling LSD, competing against each other, you know, and there was actually this big field party out in Clifton. Clifton's in Fairfax County in Northern Virginia, but it's like an area where back then they had all the $1 million houses, you know, like 4 or 5 acre lots. Yeah. And, you know, when people's parents, you know, we did the classic suburban thing. When people's parents would, you know, go out of town, you know, the kids would have parties. So there was this big field party. You know, they brought in skateboard ramps. You know, they brought in stages for the bands. And there was just a ton of LSD. You know, eventually the cops got called. The cops came to this party, and there was like a young kid, like 15 years old, and he was tripping on LSD, and he was like running through the woods naked or something. one of the Fairfax County police officers actually chased him, tackled him. Somehow, the kid started freaking out. He grabbed the cop's gun and he shot the cop in the arm.
Wow. Okay.
So that triggered the whole investigation, which, I can see, as time has gone on, I can see how from the Fairfax County Police Department, one of their own got shot.
Sure.
It was just like, basically, a flesh wound or whatever, but still he got shot, so they didn't like that. But, to me, that triggered, like, what I see in my mind, it was like an LSD witch hunt.
Mm-hmm.
So then they just started going crazy, the Fairfax County narcotics, they brought in the DEA, and it was all timing. Like, everything in life is timing. Mm-hmm. So this is 91. So this is also the time, these federal mandatory minimums, these war on drug laws have been on the books like 3 years at this point. But, the prosecutors, especially in Northern Virginia and Maryland, they're getting a lot of heat because these laws are only being applied, to basically like African Americans from D.C.,
mm-hmm.
For crack cases,
mm-hmm.
So they're getting heat politically. So then, the DEA starts this new initiative, like, we're going to go out to the suburbs, we're
mm-hmm.
going to bust white drug dealers, and I kind of fell in that. I was in that first wave, when the DEA went out to the suburbs.
Got aggressive, yeah.
Yeah, and just wrong person, wrong place, wrong time, and I had flooded the area with LSD. This cop got shot, so they started an investigation, and like this was in June, and then by August, I got arrested and they indicted me.
Okay, so you get indicted, you get arrested. How do you and when do you become a fugitive?
Well, yeah, shortly thereafter. So, actually,
because I think it's an interesting question too, Seth. Because a lot of people, you knew you were looking at a lot of time. This is when they were getting aggressive. The 90s, 80s, and 90s was crazy time that they would give for drugs. But it's kind of an interesting question. If you're looking at 25, 50 years, what would you do? Do you you sit around and wait, or do you take off and see if they can find you? Because the alternative is you're going to be spending a lot of time in prison. So I think it's interesting to think about what would you do if you were in your shoes, because you knew you were caught.
Yeah.
The back end of it is how much do I get out of this?
Yeah, well, what I did, right? Because anytime, especially back then, when you get caught by the feds, right, all your lawyers are doing is they want you to plead.
Yep.
They're pushing you to cooperate. Because they're saying that's the only way. If you go to trial, you're going to get hit. Or whatever. So, well,
what they do is they stack up all those years on you and say, really, if you go, we could get past, 10 of these, but, you get one of them, that's 20 years. And, you look at those crazy statistics of the people who get indicted, 97% plea.
Yeah.
That's in the United States of America. So you're right. When the defense criminal attorneys get involved in them, they're just negotiators.
Yeah, they don't want to go to trial. Because I think even like the feds,
neither side wants to go to trial.
The feds at that time, they had like crazy. They had like a 99% conviction rate or something like that. So, and like most of the cases do plea. So actually, what I did, I had no intentions of cooperating. I was going to flee from the outset. I was like, I'm not doing this time. I had a little bit of money, So I told my lawyer, I said, look, I'll sign a plea deal and I'll say I'm going to cooperate, right? But as soon as I signed the plea deal, like I took off, because they gave me
you got a bonded.
I got personal recognizance.
Sure.
Because they thought I was going to help them. Like they thought I was going to bring in people from California and set people up, and like I was going to put all these feathers in their cap and make their career.
Sure.
But so basically, I tricked them. I took off. And before
do you have an idea where you were going, Seth? Because that's kind of like you.
No, I knew I was going back to California. I had a lot of contacts. Right. I had family in California, so I was going back to California. But then I did something else to throw them off my trail. I faked my suicide because my idea was like, if Seth Ferranti is dead, after 7 years, if they don't find a body, I can be declared legally dead. And once I'm declared legally dead, then there is no case. The case is gone because I'm dead. So I developed this ruse. I remember when I was a teenager in Northern Virginia, I would always read like the newspapers. I was a big sports fan, and right in front of the sports section of the Washington Post was a Metro section. So sometimes I would catch like the Metro headlines as I was going to the sports section, and there was this area called Great Falls on the Potomac River, a national park in Northern Virginia, where a lot of people would commit suicide. I would always see in the Metro section, like, so and so commit suicide. Yeah, because they would jump in the water. And what it is, it's like class 5 rapids, but then it
takes you away.
Yeah, but it's also like a lot of rocks. So you can't swim in class 5 rapids, and it's like rocks. So, if you don't drown, you get smashed against the rocks and you die. So it was pretty much
Sounds like a terrible way to go.
Well, pretty much like a foolproof way, though, to commit suicide. So I'd known this over the years. So when I got in this situation, that kind of popped into my head. And I was like, how can I throw these dudes off my trail? How can I really, really not only disappear, but really disappear? Just make Seth Ferranti like dead, obsolete. And so I came up with this plan. I went there, like I staged it. I made it seem like I went in the water. And, then I took off and I went to California. And I was in California. I was staying in LA with some friends. And, back then they had like the big newsstands on every corner with all the big national papers, right? Because we didn't have the internet and stuff. So I would go to the newsstand every day and I would buy the Washington Post. And like first, it was cool because it was like, Fairfax LSD kingpin, commit suicide. And I was like,
so they covered it.
Yeah. I was like, I got him. I was like, I got him. It was in print, but then, after 2 weeks, I went and I got the Washington Post, and I went to the Metro and I saw the headline, and my heart just sank because it said prosecutors declare Fairfax County LSD kingpin suicide a hoax.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I started reading it, man. I was like, man, where did I mess up? What did I do wrong? I thought I had him, because I was only 20, but I thought like I'm this super smart,
really smart,
outlaw, genius, criminal mastermind or whatever. And so I started reading it, and it says the park rangers, they dragged the river for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And they didn't find a body because where I messed up was I staged my suicide on the wrong side of the dam, so the area where I did it, because they got all the bridges, going into D.C., so they calm the water down, before it goes out to the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah. So I did it on the wrong side of the dam, so they dragged the river. They didn't find a body. They always found bodies in this part where I did it. So, there goes
so there's no body.
Me being super smart. I thought I was so smart, and I committed my suicide on the wrong side of the dam or faked my suicide.
Just one detail.
So once that happened, then I was declared a fugitive.
Yeah. And
not only was I declared a fugitive, but, because I had basically, tricked them, like they thought I was going to cooperate, and then
they weren't happy with you.
They didn't get any, they were not happy with me.
Yeah.
So then, because like I say, I didn't carry guns. I wasn't violent. I didn't have a criminal organization. I wasn't in the mafia. I wasn't in a gang. I wasn't in any type of organization. I was just basically a freelancer, that fronted stuff to people under me. They didn't even cash buyers. I fronted to people colleges and came back and collected the money. So, and in my mind, I was like this really in the big scheme of things, a little small, drug dealer,
even though they called you a kingpin.
Yeah. Selling what I thought were righteous drugs.
Yeah.
And, being marijuana, LSD, mushrooms, stuff like that. But, for some ungodly reason, I guess because I pissed them off or I made them look bad or I was like the black mark on their record. Like they were like, how did this young kid like outsmart the feds? They pushed and they did all the paperwork and made me a top 15 U.S. Marshals list, which I didn't even know that until I was finally caught. But I was a fugitive from 91 to 93. I was in California first, but after 6 months, I ran out of money. And I didn't have a lot of money, but I had a substantial amount of money for that time. And
was it hard to stay under? Like, did you feel like you couldn't go anywhere or do anything?
I had a whole bunch of IDs, man. I got all my IDs for like real DMV. So, when I was a fugitive, right before I became a fugitive, I read all these books. Back then they had these companies like Paladin Press, Loot Panics that, they do subversive books. Yeah. Like the most famous being probably like the Anarchist Cookbook.
Yeah.
But, they had all these ID books like Identity Theft, Paper Tripping, Reborn in the USA.
Yeah.
So I had read all these books, and they told you how to get ID from legitimate sources. So what I would do, I would find an obituary. I would comb the obituaries. I would go like on the microfilm in like big libraries, and I would find an obituary, and it would be someone that I was looking for a candidate that was born in one state and died in one state under the age of 5.
Okay.
Once I found that out, I had all the information I needed for the death certificate. You know, just need the person's name, place of death, date of death.
Mm-hmm.
So then I would write, and I had like a mailbox, et cetera, or ones that you can, use like a suite number, an apartment number. Mm-hmm. And I would write and I would say like, I'm the person's aunt, I'm their uncle, and I would send the $10, send me the birth certificate. So once I got, or the death certificate. So once I got the death certificate and the obituary, I had all the information I needed to order the birth certificate, which you need a person's name, place of birth, date of birth, mm-hmm. mother's maiden name, father's name.
And that was all on there.
Yeah. So from those two, from the death and the obituary, I would have all that information. So then I would write and get the birth certificate. And as long as it was someone who died in one state and was born in another, they don't cross, even to this day, they don't cross-reference.
Isn't that crazy to think that, Seth, that they don't cross-reference that?
They do if you're born in the same county or the same state. Because I tried some in the same state. And you
but if you go outside and cross state lines.
You would get the birth certificate, it would be marked deceased. But if born in one state, died in another, and I learned all this by reading the books. And then once I had the birth certificate, I was home free because you can verify a social security number really easy. So I actually had this book called Understanding U.S. Identifying Documents. Mm-hmm. And it broke down how social security numbers, so with social security numbers, the first 3 numbers, that goes by state.
Okay.
So, each state has
their own numbers.
Yeah, those 3. But it might be like, it could be like from 039 to 046.
Yeah.
Might be like Rhode Island or something.
Yeah. And
then the next 2 numbers are by year, but it's not like, it's not like the year. Like, it's not like if, you were born in 1971, the number would be 71. But if you were born in 71, the number might be like
corresponding
35.
Yeah.
So it was all, and then the last 4 numbers are random.
Okay.
So I got these books and it broke all this down. So with that,
you could kind of figure out how to make
off the birth certificate. I could create a social security number, and then a lot of these DMVs, like, you don't have to have a social security card. All you have to have is a W-2 form. I think still to this day, all you have to have is a W-2 form, and the W-2 forms you could go buy at a business wholesale supply company store, right?
Yeah.
They're like those things, like the old stuff. I think they're probably still like that, where it has like the multiple sheets and they make the copies.
Yeah.
So I'd buy those, I'd type them up. I'd use that formula to get my social security number, and I'd go in there and I'd have the birth certificate, and I got the W-2
with all the
to
information.
verify, and maybe I need like a bill or something in my name at the address where I'm sending the ID. And I did it, so I was getting like legitimate state ID.
That's crazy.
By the last 2 years, the end of the time I was a fugitive before I got caught, I had like 25 fake IDs, and I had 4 passports.
You had 4 passports.
Yeah, and fake names. So my ultimate plan was to, first,
What made you think you wouldn't leave the country? What made you stay in the country?
I wanted to leave the country.
Because you had the 4 passports.
I had another goal. I wanted $250,000 cash.
Okay.
That was my goal. When I had $250,000 cash, I was going to leave the country, and I was going to make a life in another country, and then, establish an identity over there.
Right.
And then maybe eventually
come back to the States. That's the money you thought you needed to take that jump.
Then maybe eventually come back to the States as somebody from a different country.
Yeah.
So that was my plan. And I was working toward that goal because, the whole time, once I ran out of money, after 6 months in LA, I went back to Texas. I hooked up with my Mexican weed connections in Dallas, Texas, and I started running loads of weed, brick pot from Dallas, Texas up to St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like my whole St. Louis connection was when I was a fugitive, because I started running like hundreds of pounds up here.
That's how you met your girl, too.
Yeah. And that was mostly, I would do that on the train. So I was doing that on Amtrak. So I would bring like 2 duffel bags in. Sometimes I would check them. Sometimes I wouldn't, with like 50 pounds each. And I would get like a sleeper car, and I would take, and it was only like a 10-hour shot from Dallas to St. Louis on Amtrak. And I would take that ride, like a 10, 12 hour. And I was bringing, like every once a month, every other 2 weeks. And mostly I was taking a lot of it up to Columbia,
Mizzou. Yeah.
And that was kind of like my second little drug run that I had for, like another maybe, 18 months or so. And like I said, I was making money. I kind of got my mojo back. I kind of got where I wasn't so paranoid. I started dating, but everybody called me Christopher Haas. because I had a whole bunch of different fake IDs where the first name was Christopher.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't want anybody to know my last name. So, I acted like I was from Texas. And in Texas back then, late 80s, early 90s, like they used to be like, "What's up, Captain? What's up, Hoss?"
Mm-hmm.
That was
so you
kind
just
of like,
became Christopher
yeah,
Hoss.
so that was how, like, instead of saying dude down there, they would call you like Captain or Hoss.
Mm-hmm.
So I call everybody Hoss, like I'm from Texas. That's my backstory. So everybody called me Christopher Hoss.
Wow. So when did, so you're doing this, you're kind of getting more comfortable with the fact that you're a fugitive. Did they surprisingly grab you?
No, what happened is I was actually with a friend. Actually, he was a guy I met in Texas. It was from St. Louis that, led to me coming up here, because he used to buy weed from me. He worked in a restaurant and used to buy weed from me down there. And he was like, "I'm going back to St. Louis. That's where I went to high school." He's like, "You want to come up and party?" I was like, "Well, can you sell weed? People that'll buy weed?" He's like, "Yeah." So I grabbed like 20 pounds and I went up there. I didn't even sell it all, but, maybe I brought some back, probably like 4 or 5 pounds, but I made enough connections, made it worth my while. So basically I had like another little mini drug run, but I never made, like I say, I had that goal like 250, so I never came close. But it was like, because before that, the first 6 months, I was like really, really, really paranoid, like looking over my shoulder. Because when the feds come in and just like take your whole life,
sure,
you think
changes
like,
everything,
yeah,
turns
you
your
think
world
like
upside down.
Like all powerful. They know everything's going on, but in reality, I mean, they just rely on cooperators and snitches. They don't know anything. There's no like Inspector Clouseau's on the force,
right?
You know what I'm saying? That really, I think our law enforcement and stuff they've gotten so lazy because of the war on drugs. They don't do any investigating.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? They just rely on people telling them stuff. So, but yeah, it was kind of nice to kind of get my mojo back. I mean, I actually started feeling like a person again.
Mm-hmm.
But then how it all came crashing down was I was actually with the same dude that introduced me to St. Louis, and he was still working at a restaurant, and we were actually going out to party in St. Charles down on Main Street,
Mm-hmm.
and we were doing a drop, and he was doing a drop at the restaurant. But for whatever reason, it was too busy or something, so he couldn't do the drop. But I didn't know this. And it wasn't even a lot of weed. It was maybe like a half pound or something. And so then we went out, and I had to do a drop too. So I dropped like more. I think I dropped like 3 pounds. And dude had to go to dude's house, and he was going to come back. But, like a lot of drug deals, like they take forever. So we were in this Burger King in St. Charles, and we actually went and ate, and then like they closed. And we're still waiting for this dude to bring me 3 pounds. And I don't know there's any weed in the truck. So then, we went and we want to sit in the truck and smoke some weed. So we didn't want to do it right in the parking lot. So we kind of pulled behind the Burger King, like in the back. And it was closing time. So they were doing like what people do at closing time. And unfortunately, this Burger King had got robbed like 2 weeks before. And the people went right in the back and robbed them.
So it looked like you guys were casing the joint.
Yeah, and we're just back there smoking weed. So they call the cops on us. The cops come, and really we're smoking a joint, and I got a couple other joints in my pockets. I got them like on the inside pocket of the jean, you know what I'm saying? Because you had to conceal stuff back then just in case. So, I think we're cool, right? Because I don't have any weed, and my dude, he supposedly made his drop. So, and it's my guy's car. It's not even my truck. So, they're checking our ID, whatever, asking if they can search the vehicle. The guy says, yeah, you can search the vehicle. And, they might smell weed, but, we don't have any. They pat me down. They don't find nothing. And so then they go in his truck and they look around. And the guy was a musician, so he had a couple of guitar cases in the back. And so they first look and they look. They don't see nothing. So, I mean, it's a truck. There's not like it's a lot of room. So they're like, okay, cool. But then the other cop, because then by then, like another cop car comes up. Like every time, there's always like 2 or 3 cops got to come up for one thing, which I always thought is crazy. Like, why do you need so many cops? I guess it's an intimidation thing. I don't know. But so this other cop comes, and then, I think we're good to go. And then he looks in the guitar case. He wants to look in the guitar case. And under the guitar, there's like a half pound of weed that, the guy couldn't drop because the kitchen was too busy. So, so I'm like, fuck. But still at the same time, I'm like, well, it's not mine. It's his truck. You know what I'm saying? I got a fake ID. I'm good. They don't know who I am. So but they arrest both of us.
Yeah.
We go to the station. I holler at the dude, because we're in the cell. They put in different cells, and I tell him, I'm like, man, you better tell him that shit is yours, bro. I'm saying that shouldn't even been there.
Mm-hmm.
So he fucking tells him, he's like, oh, it's mine. It's my car. He didn't have anything to do with it. So they let me go, but they had already printed me. Like when they first booked us, they printed us. So I don't get a charge or nothing. They let me go because he says it's his.
Yeah.
So I get out. I go pick up the money for the 3 pounds. From the guy that was selling the 3 pounds.
You had to be a sigh of relief, though. They just let you out of there.
Oh, yeah, of course. I go get the money, 3 pounds. I go back. I bail out the other dude with that money, and they impounded his car. I pay to get his car out, and he has a charge. But, they took my prints.
Mm-hmm.
So, at that time, too, I was watching all those shows. Like I was watching America's Most Wanted,
But you were one of them.
Yeah, Unsolved Mysteries. Yeah. I used to watch all that stuff to see like how long did it take prints to match up. And I remember, vividly, I'd watch the thing about like the Night Stalker, like Richard Ramirez.
Yeah.
And it was something crazy. Like this dude was like a serial killer. And it took like something like 6 months to match up his prints.
Match his prints, really.
So I'm thinking, man, I'm just like this little weed LSD dealer. I'm like, it's going to take forever to match my prints. Mm-hmm. But see, because I had no idea. I was like top 15 U.S.
Yeah,
Marshals
you didn't know that.
Right? They matched my prints up in 3 days.
Uh-oh.
Right? Then they had like the Midwest, Missouri U.S. Marshals Task Force. Like they don't even work out of St. Louis. Like they bounce all around the Midwest. Yeah. So they're like in on my case. I find out all this afterwards. So the guy that I'm with, they have his real name and his address. So they go right to his house and his address is like with his mom and his grandparents. Mm-hmm. So, they convince him, they bust him and they convince him he has to turn himself in. And he has to cooperate. So then he starts driving the U.S. Marshals around to all the people that we were selling weed to, because he was kind of like my partner too. Yeah. He was like my right hand man or whatever. He's the one who introduced me to all these people. So they're driving the U.S. Marshals, and it just so happened, and people are telling me. So I'm getting phone calls, and I'm like, man, what am I going to do? So I'm kind of like hiding out at hotels, because I don't know who to trust. So I'm like staying, I'm paranoid. Hotel, and I got like a load of weed that I'm trying to move, and trying to turn into money. Like I'm having like a fire sale. Like I'm calling it. But out, right? Nobody wants to mess with me because I'm hot.
You're hot.
Because everybody's getting word, that the U.S. Marshals are looking for me, right? So finally, I talked to this guy up in Colombia that I did a lot of business with, and I gave him a good deal. And he's like, okay. He's like, I'm going to be down there tomorrow. He goes, I got the cash. I'm going to take everything you got.
Okay.
I'm like, cool. And then it just so happens, like one of the local dudes that I had dropped him off, he'd bought like 5 pounds. And right when he pulled in his house, the U.S. Marshals pulled in right after him. Wow. And he knew at the hotel that I was at, while I was setting up this big Colombia deal. So he tells them, so, they come and they do surveillance on me because they want to see what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So they watch me all night, but nobody comes and goes because I'm just waiting on this one dude. He was supposed to come see me like 10 a.m. that morning. U.S. Marshals busted into my hotel room. I was staying right by the airport, like in Bridgeton. They busted my room like 6 a.m., busted me with the weed. I only had like 20-something pounds. I didn't have that much money, man. I maybe had like, I don't know, $3-4 grand. But I had all my fake IDs. I had like 25 fake IDs. I had like 4 passports.
All of it on you.
Yeah. Everything, because I'm ready. I'm ready. Like, as soon as I make this deal, like, I'm bouncing. You're going
to be gone.
I was already made plans. I was going down to New Orleans.
Yeah.
I had some people down in New Orleans, and then I was going to go to, like, Baton Rouge, go to, like, LSU.
This is the last deal.
Yeah. I was going to get some more weed in Texas, and I was going to go to LSU. I had friends in Baton Rouge, and I was going to sell weed there, and hide out. And they come in, they get me, and then I know what's up. They tell me, like, you're top 10. Top 15 U.S. Marshals list. They take me into the federal holding cells, in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And it was crazy because, like, when they caught me, like, I still had no idea, right, that I was this high priority.
Yeah.
Like, everybody's coming by, like, they want to see me. Like, I felt like I'm an animal in a zoo.
Uh-huh.
They're like, oh, is that him?
That's him.
And then the U.S. Marshals finally come back, and, they do stuff like, they bring me in a little office, and they're like, you want a Coke? You want a candy bar? They're like, sign your wanted poster.
Mm. That's wild.
And they give me like a Coke and a candy bar, and I'm still not really clued in. And then I'm like, why? What's the big deal? And they tell me, and I'm like, how am I like? you got like killers and murderers
and
and
I made
terrorists.
the list.
And you got basically I'm like a cannabis psychedelic activist, nonviolent, and I'm like top 15. So I thought it was like one of the most crazy things, but whatever, it was cool. I got a cool wanted poster out of it. So
I guess you did. And not too many people have that, Seth. So you did, did it happen pretty fast? From that point forward to getting into prison? I mean,
yeah. So I was caught like October. I was sentenced I think October 30th or something. Yeah. I was sentenced December 13th.
And what was your world like when they gave you that 25-year sentence? I mean, what did that do?
No, it was crazy. So when the judge first said it, right? So I got 300. The feds give you months, so they say
which you had to figure that out.
304 months. So when he first said 304 months, I was kind of like, that's not that bad. But then I was like, wait.
That is a lot.
12. I'm like, how many, like, I don't even know how many years that is. I couldn't even do the math.
No, it's too much math.
I'm like 12. And so, it ended up, I had a 25-year, 4-month sentence. I was only 22, so I had more time than how old I was.
Than what they were giving you.
For a first-time,
nonviolent
cannabis LSD offense. So, whatever. But basically, at this point, like I'm kind of in shock. My first time in prison. I've just been in the county jails, but still, and
the county jail is awful. I mean, that's one of the things that, as you get through the system, you understand that the county jail is kind of like the bottom rung of society, and then you go live basically and create a life for yourself at prison. So you get sentenced. You get the 25 years. Where do they send you to, Seth?
So I started out at FCI Manchester in Kentucky. So I started out.
Is that a medium?
Yeah, started out like a medium high. Like, look.
Well, because they're not going to let you down low because you're an escape risk.
I was an escape risk. So I had all these security. Look, when I first came in, right, like when I first got captured, and then even my first 5 years, like when I would transfer, I was black boxed.
Yeah.
And they made me like sit in the back of the plane. So
sure,
I got this other thing. So right when I first come in, like I came in, like they shipped me to El Reno because it was before they had Oklahoma City. So El Reno was a transit spot. And so,
I didn't even know that. I just have always heard of Oklahoma City being the
so they
transport.
built that after. So I go to El Reno, right, and I get on the plane, and they're taking me back. After I get designated, I go from they fly, which is crazy too. They fly me from Virginia out to El Reno to fly back to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Which,
do a little zigzag.
That's the BOP and the U.S. Marshals logic, but that's how they always do it. So we go there, boom, I'm in El Reno, whatever, a week or so waiting to catch my plane or my bus, and then we go back and I get on this plane, and we land in Terre Haute, Indiana, where the penitentiary is, right? They got an airstrip there, and so here I am. I'm like, I'm tall. I'm like 6'1", but I'm like maybe, 185 pounds. I was athletic. I didn't really work out, though. I was just, athletic, played a lot of sports growing up and stuff like that. And I'm sitting, but I'm like short hair. I look like a college kid, pale because
you're only 20 years old or 22 years old.
And so I'm sitting in the back of the plane, and I'm black box, and there's like a U.S. Marshal sitting like right across from me, like looking at me the whole time. So here comes, the bus from Terre Haute.
You might explain what black box is, because people get shackled, but then the bad boys of the bad boys get the black box.
Yeah. So what the black box is, it's like a little box. It like makes your wrists go like right together. So it's like handcuffs. They put the black box over the handcuffs, so you have no movement.
Can't move at all.
And then they attach that to your waist chain.
Yep.
So it's like you have no hand movement, like anything. That's what they do.
And being shackled is worse enough. I mean, that makes you feel like you're an animal, but the black box thing is a whole nother
so it
level.
was crazy. So we're at the airstrip in Terre Haute, and, they bring the bus from, the USP Terre Haute, which was a pretty violent prison, a lot of people, lifers. And so I'm kind of sitting there in the back of the plane, and they got weights there too. So like all these huge dudes, all these like big biker looking dudes. They look like Thor, with tattoos, all muscled out. All these big black dudes look like Diva, getting on. And, all these like, hardcore Spanish, Colombian cartel looking dudes and like Italian mafia dudes. And they're all getting on the plane. And they're all turning, because I'm right in the back of the plane where they get up, and they're all turning.
This guy with the black
box. They're
box.
looking at me, and they're like, I could just see in their eyes. They're like, who's this dude?
Yeah. Why is he here?
Yeah. Who's this? What is this? Like Jeffrey Dahmer or something? I mean, they didn't have a muzzle on me or nothing, but they're just looking at me. And I look like a little college kid.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of like my first memory, like of like real prison when
being indoctrinated.
And I'm looking at these dudes and I'm like, man, I'm glad I'm not going to Terry Hut.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know what Manchester is, but I know it's only FCI and not a USP. So I'm like, man, I'm glad I didn't go to the USP. So finally, I get to the Manchester, and it was actually kind of nice. It was like a college campus. Actually, when I first came in, they actually had professors from Eastern Kentucky like coming on the school. So I immediately rolled in college courses. They used to be able to use Pell Grants for prisoners there. That only lasted my first 2 years. So that kind of college program lasted like my first 2 years. When I was there, I got like 24 credits. And I would just work out, play sports, go to class,
Was it easy for you to get, because going into prison, I think, is always interesting from the standpoint that you are the new guy. They do look at you. They try to, check you out, see who you are. Did you find your people fairly easily in the beginning? Because, I think probably for you, Seth, for your first 5 years would probably be different than your next 15, 18 years. I mean, walk me through some of that happened to you first 5 years you're there. Because then you became pretty, prolific in how you got involved with the sports. You got involved writing the newsletter that had all the stats on it that everybody was sending home to their families. And you got involved in so many different things, but kind of walk me through how that all happened.
Yeah, well, looking back now, I was kind of lucky in a sense because prison is really about people judge you by who your allies are. So who you hang around or who they see you on the compound with, that's kind of, they equate you with those people. So I had two things going for me because I'm in Kentucky. My case is out of Virginia. I'm an 083 number. But immediately when you hit the compound, they're like, where are you from? I'm from California because I grew up in California. So, I'm from California. So the only other dudes, so the people on the block, they're like, okay, we're going to get your homeboys. So the only people from California are the Sureños, the Mexican gangbangers. And there's not a lot of them. There's maybe like 5, 6 on the whole compound. Actually, 2 of them.
With some hardcore dudes.
2 of them, luckily 2 of them happen to be on my block.
Yeah.
So they bring these Mexican gangbangers to me. They're like, where are you from? I'm like, I grew up in San Diego, blah, blah, blah. They're like, where's your case? Oh, my case out of Virginia. I was shipping, stuff from Cali, Northern Cali to Virginia, selling at colleges. So then they're like, okay, you got to write this cop out. You got to get your PSI. We got to check out your paperwork. So I do that. They get my PSI, check out my sentence, read, they sit there in the cell with me and they read it. And they're like, okay, you're okay. So they're like, and then they tell me, they're like, look, anybody else ask for your paperwork? We don't care, white boys, whatever. You tell them we read it. We vouch
you're
for
good.
You. We read your shit.
Yeah.
You're good. You can walk. Right. So then I'm working out with these dudes. They're like, come on, homeboy, we're going to go work out. So I'm working out with
so they're part of your car.
Dudes. Yeah, because it's the only California dudes. It's me and these fucking like 5 Sereno dudes.
Yeah.
So I'm with them. So then immediately all the other white boys see me with these guys. And this is weird too, because at that time, I didn't know. Like I was so naive. Like these Sereno dudes, like they're running the heroin on the compound.
Wow.
Like I have no idea.
Yeah.
So I'm like this new white kid. I got like this 25-year sentence. People find that out real quick. Because even some people, like they're like, how much time you got? I'm like 25. They're like, what'd you do? Kill people? Mass murder? I'm like, no, I sold LSD and marijuana. So this was still, a lot of the people were still in from the 80s, like the old law. So this is like still the beginning of the new law. These laws have only been,
laws.
Yeah, the mandatory minimums and stuff. And so, you didn't see people coming in with that kind of time, and especially not like a little white kid from the suburbs. So that was one thing that helped me. The other thing that helped me, I got Italian last name.
Yeah. Very Italian.
I'm on the East Coast. There's a lot of mob dudes. So all the mob dudes start coming to me. All the Italians, they're like, who's your grandpa? Who's your dad? My grandpa and my dad were both military guys. But, where are you from? Where's your family from? They're trying to see if there's any connection. And there was no connections, but still they liked me. They saw I'm messing with the Serranos. Yeah, they say I'm messing with the Serranos. So they figure like I got to be somebody. Yeah. So, within a couple weeks of being on the compound, I'm walking around, I'm sitting in the chow hall with the mob dudes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting at the Italian table.
Yeah.
And I'm working out with the Serenos.
Yeah, you're plugged in.
So all the white dudes are looking at me like, who is this
Yeah.
dude? And then, like I say, I didn't know that Serenos were running the drugs. I had no idea. So eventually, like I'm in there, 4, 5, 6 months. Like a lot of the white dudes start coming up to me, and especially the guys from Virginia, because they find out I got a Virginia case. I'm over A3. They're like, "Yo, homeboy." They're like, "Man, plug us in." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "Plug us in, man, with your homies." And like, I have no idea.
You had no idea.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So this was kind of like my entrance, to federal prison. So I did 12 years in the mediums, my first 12 years of mediums. So that's like, and if you've been in the feds, they call the mediums like gladiator schools.
Gladiator school, right?
Like, you got to fight. Like I say, I had to fight. I played a lot of sports. I was out on the yard. So, luckily I was always the type of dude. I never let stuff fester. Like, there's certain things.
Because a lot of stuff can happen out on the yard.
Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff like you can't call,
especially basketball.
Yeah, you can't call dudes like certain words.
Yeah.
So once because actually the Sereno dude actually sat me down and he was like, don't do drugs, don't gamble, don't mess with punks. Mm-hmm. And he was like, if you got a problem, come get me.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So that was kind of like my rules. He gave me
your prison rules.
Yeah. So then, and then I learned too, like there's certain things like you don't call a man, like you can't call a man a bitch, you can't call a man a punk, you can't call a man a faggot, or whatever. So, I was all this type of dude because I played a lot of sports. Like if somebody came out of their mouth wrong, I didn't care if there was cops or anything there. I would just punch them because that's how the Sereno dudes taught me. They're like, man, if you got something,
don't take it.
Don't let it fester. Handle it right there.
Stand up.
Because then whatever, you guys are both going to go the hole, you might come out, because if you make it a beef and it becomes racial or then people want to get a knife or come stab you and it can turn. So they're like, just handle it. Their attitude was like, they didn't care if it was in the chow hall. Mm-hmm. They go handle it.
Right then.
Handle your business. So that's what they taught me. So, I was in, not a lot of situations like that, but a little, like I would fight. Like I always tell people, like my nose has been broken like 5 times. I got my right split right here, my lower lip, I got split right here, and I got split right here, and like I don't have a knuckle.
Oh wow, you don't.
That's all from fighting.
Yeah,
like that. I probably broke this like 5 times. Like I got, like they call it like a boxer's.
Yeah,
a boxer's knuckle.
I don't think I've seen that.
You know what I'm saying?
Hey, you don't have a knuckle there.
Yeah, it's from punching people. But so like I said,
good story though.
Yeah, so I did like 12 years. In the gladiator school.
That's a good thing to say. Like if you're at a bar, you're like, "Why don't you have that knuckle?" I was looking at a bunch of fights in prison.
Not to say I was not a tough guy or nothing, but
you
I
said
fight.
you had to handle your business.
I would fight, and I played a lot of sports, and
primitive world.
Yeah, and like in there, anyhow, if you don't fight, it's like your own people are the ones who are going to come and prey on you.
Right.
So, like I say, I kind of established my reputation as like a crazy white boy. Like I was a white dude that was out, running full court with all the black dudes. I was a white dude that was playing soccer with all the Spanish, Mexicans, and Jamaicans. I was always that guy.
But one thing I thought about, playing sports in prison, I think the one cool thing about the whole sports scene in prison was it really wasn't an escape.
Oh, definitely.
You go out there and you play a basketball game, you play a softball game, you play a volleyball game, you play soccer, whatever it is. We even had a tennis court that was crazy ass tennis court that moved. It was a sport court, and we had to. It's hard to explain, but anyway, we even played a little bit of tennis. But all those things, you had an escape. It felt like you were outside of the fence.
Yeah, no,
it really did.
It took you away. That's why I'm saying that's why I played sports. I worked out, and then I started taking the college classes. And then eventually I get into my writing because that was kind of like my escape.
So, do you think, Seth, that is when you started doing those courses? Is that what kind of fueled your flame to say, wow, I got a bunch of stories in here?
Yeah, no, definitely, man.
Because you created a business for yourself inside prison, which is terribly unique from the standpoint that it's hard to get things done. Your phone calls are taped. They record them all. Unlimited. You have, whenever you're sending stuff back and forth with TrueLinks, and I don't know if they had TrueLinks and CoreLinks in the 90s, but they look at that.
Yeah, they didn't. It didn't come around until like 2010 or something.
Any of that stuff is
it's all monitored.
It's all monitored. So you were able to write columns for Vice and other things inside prison, which I find is fascinating. But tell me how that all, because you started kind of opening up your mind, and my God, there's guys in here that are famous pretty much on the streets, but they don't have any books about them.
Yeah. Well, see, because I was taking the college courses, I was in the law library all the time, because first I was taking the college classes on the Pell Grant, but then I started taking correspondence courses, which my parents paid for, the prison didn't pay for them. So I had maybe 24 credits that were funded by Pell Grants, and then, I was doing so good, I kind of convinced my parents. My parents, everybody in my family has a master's degree anyhow, so it was like
it's time for you to get your master's degree in prison.
Mine just took a lot longer.
Yeah.
But it was a long journey for me. But so I was always in the law library, and I was always typing stuff up because I was always sending my papers out. You know? And I was taking mostly, in correspondence, you can go like a business route, or you can kind of go like a literary English route. Yeah. Like humanities. So I went the humanities route. I was always kind of a creative person anyhow. I like played guitar, sung in bands, wrote poetry.
You were going to be a rock star.
Yeah, I was like dungeon master for like D&D and stuff like that. So I was already kind of creative. I'd even started like, what I would have called like the Great American Novel a couple times as a teenager, but never wrote more than a couple of pages because it was, too much work. I was out there partying and stuff. Right. But I was always in there on the typewriter. And then being that I had all these connections, like by playing sports, in there, they have the administrative remedies, like the cop-outs, BP9, BP 8.5. So every time people had problems or would go to the hole, or they would take their privileges, or they were trying to move, get closer to family, or get their visits back, or good time, they had to file these. And the way they did it, like you had to type them up, and there was like limited typewriters. So I had like all the time, like white dudes, black dudes, Spanish dudes that I knew from playing sports. They would see that I was in there, so they would come and they'd say, "Hey man, can you type this up for me?" Whatever, I'll give you a book of stamps.
That'd be like gold.
Yeah, I would do that. I would do that a lot. And so then I started doing this as I was doing my college courses. And eventually, after a couple years, like I got where like I could charge like $25, like because I was winning. I was getting people good time back. I was getting people the commissary back. I was getting people transferred. I was getting people lower bunks. Yeah. I was getting people like special tennis shoes, like anything you could get that people were trying to get. I became known as, not like a jailhouse lawyer.
No, but that gets around.
Yeah. But in-house
this guy can help you.
Yeah. So it started out just typing, and so this was like my side hustle, right? And at the same time, I'm doing my college courses. And so I'm doing really heavily, I'm reading too, like when I first get in there, I'm reading like every prison book I can find because I'm basically schooling myself. I don't know anything about prison. Sure. So this is kind of like, my guide to prison. So the first 2 years I was in, I probably read like every, I read like In the Belly of the Beast, Jack Henry Abbott, Soledad Brother, George Jackson, Life from Death Row, Mumia Abu Jamal, just every prison book.
Anything you get a hold of.
I read because it was all like, information.
Your education of prison.
Yeah. So then too, I started thinking, right? I'm like, I want to write my version of this. So that was the basis of my first book, Prison Stories. And actually the first 30 pages of prison stories I actually wrote for a fiction course that I was taking through the
college.
Iowa State University, or University of Iowa. And then also at the same time, like, there's all these mafia dudes, so I'm calling my mom or my girl. I'm like, find me some books, this mafia dude, like they're like in the next block. They're sending me the books. And there's all these, at that time, early 92, there's all these Colombian cocaine cartel dudes. So I'm like, find me the books. And then, around 95, that's when gangster rap blew up. Right. Right. So, like I was, a lot of times I was like the only white dude, like in the MTV raps or the BET room, because I liked hip hop anyhow. And I played basketball with all these guys. So I could go in there, so I'd be like the only white dude. So I was like privy to like these, stories and people talking that you couldn't hear anywhere else, besides prison. About, the African-American, hip-hop mythology, like drug lore, street lore, whatever you want to call it.
They were with you.
Yeah, so we're watching these raps, and they're dropping names of these different dudes, from like New York, D.C., Philly, a lot of the big cities, even L.A., the big rappers. But at that time, a lot of the big rappers were the East Coast guys, NWA had already come and passed, but, like 50 Cent was big, like Nas. And they're dropping these names of all like these street legends, these hood legends. And then like the dudes would talk about him. There might be like a dude from Queens, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's my homie." Blah blah. He's like, I'm like, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "What's that?" He's like, "Oh yeah, he's over on B Block." I'm like, "What?"
He's right here.
So then, I call my mom or my girl, and I'm like,
find me some books on them.
Some books. And there's like no books.
There's no books.
There's no books on these dudes. They might find a magazine article here or there, that they, by this time, it's like the internet had started, like around 96. So they would print me out stuff, or they would try to find me newspaper articles, or a lot of times they would go like on LexisNexis and find me articles and stuff like that and send them to me. And so I started reading this stuff. So then I started forming in my head. I'm like, at the same time, I'm working in recreation, and I'm doing like sports newsletters on the intramural sport leagues,
which is huge in prison.
Yeah,
I mean, that whole thing is gigantic. You can't explain how big that is, how big the sports world is and you're keeping their stats and writing stories.
I started out with doing the stats. Yeah. And doing like the win-loss records and posting those. And then when I was doing that, like dudes from like some of the older prisons or the USPs, they would be like, "Why don't you do a newsletter?" Yeah. I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Because I was a dude that I would walk around to every unit and post the stuff like on the bulletin board.
I bet they love that.
That was my job. And dudes kept hitting me up like, why don't you write like a column? Why don't you write a sports newsletter? I'm be like, "What do you mean?" So they started showing me ones.
Here's what you want. Here's what we want.
Yeah, from other they'd done, right?
Yeah.
And so I started looking at it. And then, like, I used to get USA Today every day, at mail call, and I for the sports section. And I remember back then, like, Peter Vesey had, like, a column, and Dick Vitale had, like, a column. Yeah. And I used to read that stuff religiously. So I'm seeing these sports newsletters from these other prisons, and I'm reading these columns every day. And then I'm like, boom, I can write these columns. Yeah. So I go propose to the recreational, and they're like, "Yeah, cool." So, I start doing that. I'm taking writing classes at college. I'm writing in the prison, for my prison audience. Right. Right. And then I find out there's all these gangsters that are being lionized and mythologized in hip-hop lore. Right. And they're all on the compound with me, and there's no books about them.
No books.
So it's just like, boom. Yeah. It, like, hits me. You know what I'm saying? And so
I love it. I mean, I love it for so many different reasons, because what a way to do your time, to find a passion that you're really good at, and then you've got the content right there and you can work with it. And to me, that's just, I don't know what you call that, Seth, but you weren't in the right place, but it was the right time for you to find that thing that you were passionate about, good with, and had a talent for, and then all of a sudden you start writing all these different books, which
and another big thing that kind of motivated me, gave me like a blueprint. So at the end of the 90s, that's like when the urban fiction genre blew up, right? And so there's all these books coming in the prisons. It's all urban fiction, right? For some dudes in prison, like Terry Woods was a big author, Shannon Holmes, Vicky Stewart, and they're forming like their own companies, right? And they're like selling like hundreds of thousands of books because it's like this new genre. It's basically like, if you go back a while, you got like Iceberg Slim and Donald Goines, but that's like the only books you can, and those were in the 70s, so that's the only books you can even compare these books to. Yeah. So I see these books and I see how the people are reacting to them, right? And I see like these are like totally like independent companies, right? So I look at like, I looked at like Terry Woods' imprint, and I looked at Vicky Stringer, which was Triple Crown Books, and I just look at these and I'm like, man, I can do this. Except I'm going to write about these real gangsters. I'm going to do nonfiction. And at the same time, I had started doing articles and stuff too, like on prison life, like I had this column for Vice called like I'm Busted. Yeah. Where I'm writing about different prison
that's
stuff.
out in the real world when you're in prison.
Yeah, and I'm doing I'm doing a lot of stuff for like prison newsletters about criminal justice reform. But I start trying to work myself as a journalist, but at the same time I'm like, I want to do books. So all this is kind of going through my head, and I'm thinking like, what can I do for my future? Because I start, my first 5 years I was like really angry. my sentence. But, after the first 5 years, I kind of settled down. And like I had a couple different mentors, older than me, dudes that had done more time, that kind of
telling you how to do your time,
potential and value in me.
Yeah.
And they, I had one dude that was really influential on me named Michael Santos, who he had like 45 years like old law. He ended up doing like 26. He's a cocaine dealer from Washington, but Cuban descent. So he like influenced me tremendously.
Mentored you.
And that was his thing. Like, what are you doing now for your future? He's like, every day you're in here, you have to do something for your
plan for your future.
And I used to work out with this dude every day. And he started writing books too. Like this dude was like a genius. He had actually, like, he made like over $1 million like on the .com boom in the 90s, like by basically watching the bottom line in the TV and then calling his sister who would like buy him stocks.
Wow.
Obviously he had a little money to begin with to buy the stocks, but he basically turned like 100,000 into like 1.2 million. Then I think he lost his ass like when the in the late 90s when the .com busted. Yeah. But he did all this from prison.
That's what gave you somewhat of an
he's
idea.
Like writing
that.
books. Yeah, and I'm seeing what he's doing. And even I at that time I'd got a couple pieces. I'd been doing the prison basketball and sports intramural stuff in the prison, so I was like a prison journalist, on the compound. But I also had a couple things, I wrote about my case, like in different FamGram or different, November Coalition, and so and I took some classes, and it was working on my associates and bachelor's degree by this time. So I used to tell people like, I'm a writer, and
you were a writer.
Like, yeah, but he was the dude. He used to bust my balls. So I'm with him, and he's like, well, what have you written? And I'm showing him basically like the same piece has been published in all these different prison newsletters. Yeah. And he's like, well, what else have you written? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I got all these pieces published. I'm like, I'm a published writer.
Right.
And I write all these, stuff in prison that's posted on the bulletin board. He's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. So he takes me to his cell.
Seth, when this got published out into the world, did you use your name?
Yeah.
Did they ever come back on you in the prison world and put you in the hole and say, hey, you can't conduct business in prison?
Oh, yeah. I got put in the hole tons of times. I fought battles with him.
Yeah.
But so this guy, Michael Santos, who became like a real big mentor for me, he took me to his cell, and he just had like boxes and boxes of stuff he's written. He's like, you know what? He's like, most of this stuff will never get published. But he goes, this is me practicing my trade. So he's like, if you want to be a writer,
right? He
goes, you need to start writing. So then I started writing more stuff, and he was a real big influence on me, and I started pitching more stuff, and I kind of became a journalist from prison. As soon as I started becoming a journalist from prison, writing for like Diva magazine, Feds magazine, Vice, and other places. Like I even had stuff like in Maxim and FHM, and I started getting paid. That's when the problem came, because then like the SIS, who were like the prison investigators, they started writing me shots for running a business, conducting a business, acting as a reporter. Yeah. And they started locking me up, because a lot of times I would call the people right on the phone, because back then you could call straight. It wasn't until like the late 90s where you had to call, you had to push to accept and stuff like that. Right. Back then you could call straight as long as you had money on your phone, and there was no limitations on how much you could talk. That came later, the 300-minute rule. But
which was really 10 minutes a day.
Yeah, which sucked. But so I'm getting locked up, and then I kind of found this loophole, right? So I'm looking at all the rules and regulations and stuff like this, and I find this loophole where, basically it said, like, if you own a house or a car and you're in prison, you can give a relative or a friend power of attorney.
Absolutely.
To sell that property for you. Then you're not conducting business. Like, it broke it down. This is not, but if you get on the phone and you're trying to sell it yourself, then you're conducting business. That's
But if somebody else has the power of attorney.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, well, all my writing is intellectual property.
Right.
Right. So I gave, my girl, who eventually became my wife, I gave her power of attorney. And so she used to conduct all the business. I would send the stuff that the people would they would ask me to write this and ask me to write that, like editors. Yeah. But I would send it to them and I would type it, but she would negotiate and she would conduct the business. And then she would get the check from them, and then she would, put deposit in her account, and then she would put it right on my account. I started doing this, and they hated that.
They wouldn't have liked
that
at all.
They hated that when I did that. But I had them, they couldn't do nothing. So I always had what I call sit downs.
Yeah.
Like with the SIS. And a lot of times I had to bring somebody else with me, you know, because if you can't go on the SIS,
SIS is a nasty
then people
deal.
say you're a snitch, right?
Yeah.
So I would always have to bring a friend with me, and I would have these sit downs. And even like the dudes I'd bring, they'd be like, dude, like, how do you like you're talking to SIS like you're equal.
Yeah.
You know, because I would have these sit downs.
They're scary people.
I knew the rules. You know,
they're the guys, they're the cops within the
they're
prison.
like the FBI.
Yeah,
exactly. They're like the FBI.
They're like the
they're
FBI
the ones that
in the
bust the
prison.
cops.
Exactly.
They're the ones that bust the cops for bringing in drugs and stuff like that. They arrest cops and walk them off the compound.
Right.
But so I'm having sit downs with these guys because they're like really concerned about my writing. They're like really concerned, like I'm going to expose something that's going to come back on them.
Yeah.
So, you know, once I found out what their kind of concerns were, I started writing stuff. You know, I would write something like even if it was from the institution I was in, I would make it seem like it was from another institution.
Somewhere else. Yeah.
So I started doing stuff like that, changing names, obviously, so people
Smart.
couldn't get targeted. You know, but I would still use my own name.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to build a career for myself.
Exactly. You're
building
a brand.
Even when they locked me up.
Yeah.
You know, like, dude, I wrote like whole manuscripts, like in the hole.
When you were in the hole.
In the hole with those little flimsy pencils that you can barely write with. Like I've wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages.
Unbelievable.
Like that, freehand. And then I would wait till I get out and I would type it.
Unbelievable.
You know, and so I used to tell the SIS dudes, I was like, go ahead, put me in the hole. I'll just write more.
Yeah.
And my whole attitude was like, you cannot stop me. I'm doing something for my future. I don't care if you lock me up short term. I said, I'm not doing nothing wrong. And they would always lock me up too under some BS. Like I was trying to smuggle in drugs or later on. Like,
well, they can pretty much throw you in the hole for anything. I mean, your rights of going in or out of the hole in prison, you just don't have any. So, Seth, you get through all of this. And what I think is just incredible is you end up serving, 23 years, 21 years?
21.
Okay, so 21 years. So you basically went in the 90s. You come out,
2015.
2015, you're 40?
I was 43.
43. How the world must have felt to you walking out of that prison. Can you explain that? I mean, that's just wild to me because everything had changed. I mean, you still see it on TV, but walking into it.
Right when I got out, so I did the trick that a lot of people do when they get out. Like they say they're going to take the bus.
Yeah.
But they don't take the bus. They have their people pick them up.
Right.
You know, because if your people pick them up, they only give you like a certain amount of hours. But if you say get the bus, you get the
give you more
bus
hours.
trip.
Right.
Yeah, so you get like double time. So I did that. And my wife picked me up. And first thing we did is we went to Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I was going to the halfway house and I needed like some work clothes, you know, because I already had a job lined up at a kitchen. And I remember walking around the Walmart and it was just like, I had to go back in the car and tell her what I wanted because it was like sensory overload. The choices. Yeah. You know, because for like 21 years, I was used to like, you know, there's like one brand of peanut butter.
Exactly.
You know, and I just write it on a list and I put the list
in
and
they slide it down to you.
So like walking around, you know, like having all those options and trying to choose, it was like too much for me. Like I literally went back in the car.
Too much.
And I'm like, just give me stuff. Here's my size. I can't take it.
Yeah.
You know, and then so that was a big thing, and the other big thing was like the phones, like the technology.
Yeah.
And one thing I did do, so like 2 years before I got out, I got a bunch of books, like the Idiot's Guide.
Yeah.
The Idiot's Guide to like internets, like the Dummy's Guide to iPhone.
So you started reading all that before you got out.
I did it like a textbook.
Yeah.
You know, like I would
almost like you're testing yourself to understand.
I would like highlight stuff, and I read these books like 20 times for 2 years.
So it totally was. So it wasn't unfamiliar to you when you got out.
I mean, but it was to a certain extent. You know, I just had a little knowledge. I was trying to school myself as much as I can. But I read all these books about the internet, iPhones, MacBooks.
Yeah.
You know, I even read like some video stuff because by this time I formed in my mind, that I wanted to do films.
Getting into film
when I got out. But the biggest thing that took me like 6 to 9 months to figure out when I got out was the difference between cellular and Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't understand bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
And even like talking to people, like younger kids now, like they always say, like, you ask them, hey man, can you do this for me? I don't have the bandwidth.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck do you mean? What does that mean? Like I didn't, I like,
right. What do you mean you
this
don't
was
have
like
bandwidth?
bandwidth. I was like, what are you like, you're like on the radio?
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking like, what? Like you're like on a radio dial, your bandwidth?
Right. Yeah.
This was the only experience I had with that word.
Yeah.
You know, like what you're like, you know, bandwidth, like what are you, you're on a CB radio? I had no idea. And so it took me a long time to figure out like cellular Wi-Fi, because I was like, well, you can go on the internet, you can download stuff.
Right.
But, you know, then I figured it took me like 6 to 9 months to figure that out. I had to have conversations with a lot of people. And some people that even know how to use bandwidth and know cellular Wi-Fi, they still can't explain it to you.
Right.
Because I was trying to figure out like, what is the difference? But, you know, as I was doing journalism stuff and I was working with like pictures and files, you know, for the print stuff, and they always wanted the biggest files with the highest resolution. So, you know, eventually I figured it out. It's all about the data and the size of the file.
Yeah.
You need Wi-Fi to download it.
Some things won't go unless you got bandwidth.
So, you know, I figured it out. And now, you know, with all the film stuff I do, you know, like I upload stuff to Dropbox, we transfer all the time. So I understand all that stuff now, you know. But then I was like, why can't I download the picture?
But, you know,
I got cellular.
But the thing of it is, Seth, you walked in pretty fast into the film world. I mean, I know that you'd been working on a lot of different things, but the time that you got out of prison and the whole world's different to you, the whole world has changed. It wasn't very long before you're in a situation where you're producing, directing, and making White Boy that, you know, what is
I just wrote and produced that. Sean Recker was director.
Yeah, director. So
and it was his studio, Transition Studio.
So in that whole series of things, though, what was that? Like a 2-year span? So you got out in 2015.
That happened within 18 months.
How crazy did that seem?
Well, when I got out, I knew I wanted to do film, and it's another, like I have a lot of these things that for some things I have really good timing, for some things I have really bad timing, but I'm just like a timing guy, you know. If
You're
it's
relentless.
Good or bad, like if it's good or bad.
You're relentless. You just keep going.
Yeah, but you know, I always have good timing, but like sometimes I have real bad timing. But I'm one of those people. I'm on timing. I'm always in this extreme angle. I don't know, whatever it is about me. I'm like a lightning rod for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I get out 2015, like Making a Murder is like blowing up on Netflix, putting the true crime genre on the map. I'm like a true crime journalist. You know, I'm like a true crime author. So, you know, all these different people got different stuff in productions, and they're hitting me up. They want me to be like a talking head on their stuff. So I did that maybe like 3 or 4 times, and I kind of started seeing like, you know, the setup. You know, just like you would come in here, you want to do a podcast, you see your podcast setup. You know, what's this? What's that? What kind of, you know, equipment you got? What brands? You know, how does this work? So I'm asking these questions as I'm going on these documentary sets where they interview me. And so I'm kind of figuring out, I'm like, you know, within 2 years, I'm like, man, I can do this. Like, this is not that hard, you know, because, you know, when you first see film, you think like cameras, like it's, you know, it's so expensive, you know, so much technical ability.
Yeah, it seems overwhelming.
You know, so it's like, man, can I do this? I'm just a writer. You know, I knew how to tell a story, but I didn't know how to make, you know, a documentary or film per se, even though I had taken classes about it and I wrote some scripts and stuff like that. So, but I was doing, a lot of times for my journalism for Vice and the other places I was writing for, obviously I'm concentrating on true crime stuff, but a lot of times I'm picking people that not only am I interested in what they're doing, but I'm trying to form a relationship with them, right? So, you know, sometimes people like you, sometimes they don't. So, you know, I keep meeting these different directors, interviewing them, you know, producers, whatever, showrunners, and I'm interviewing and I'm telling them about my story and I'm telling them about my ideas. And some are interested and some are like, well, whatever, fuck off. You know, just do the article, see you later. And, but I'm always probing, you know, trying to network, you know, trying to get those contacts. And like I would pick and choose like what I wanted to cover based on who the person was and if I thought I could form a relationship with them to get my goals and my agenda off. So finally I interviewed Sean Reck. He did this movie, his first feature doc. Sean Reck cut his teeth. He did like 200 Crime Stopper shows for all the networks. He won like 9 regional Emmys in Ohio.
So that was his world.
Yeah, he was a very accomplished filmmaker, and he did his first feature. It was called A Murder in the Park, and it was on Showtime. So I interviewed him for Vice. But for whatever reason, Vice ended up not even running it. They didn't even run it. So, it didn't even happen, the interview we did. So I didn't even get him the publicity that I was. But once he kind of found my backstory out,
that was of interest to him.
Yeah. So, and he was looking for his next documentary at that time. So, off the success of A Murder in the Park. And so he actually flew me. He flew me to Cleveland. And I pitched him stuff. And originally we were going to do this thing, about the prison industrial complex, where how, they form all these prisons, and then they form all these support businesses around the prisons.
Yeah,
like
cottage
hotels,
industry. Yeah.
And a lot of times the people that own these are somehow related to the senator or representative who passed the bill to get the prison there.
Yeah.
So eventually we were going to do something like this.
Which is also interesting.
Yeah, kind of look at prison profiteers.
Yeah.
And, he knew I had a lot of people we can interview, and we're going to tell their story, because that's what he likes to do stuff. He likes to expose stuff, kind of like me. That's kind of like his genre. And then we're talking, and I mentioned the White Boy Rick story, because I'd written about Rick's case while I was in for I did this one article for the Fix in 2012 that went viral covering his case. And this is another thing. I had no idea what viral meant till I got out. I had friends that were getting out before me and knew about my writing. And when they were calling, I'd call them and they'd be like, dude, you don't even know how big your stuff is out here.
That's viral.
You have no idea how big your stuff is out here, because I didn't. I'm not even on the internet. I'm getting printouts from the internet.
Right.
In snail mail. So I meet Sean, and it was probably the fourth thing I pitched him, the White Boy Rick story, because I did a piece for Vice News. I had done some stuff for Vice, and I'd done this stuff for The Fix. And I'd been kind of championing his cause. Not like I was the only one. There were other writers, too. And I had formed a relationship with him through the mail that I started in 2005. So I'd been writing Rick
for a while.
10 years by this time. And I first got interested in him when I was doing my Street Legends series, because when I was in Beckley and Gilmer, West Virginia, there was a whole bunch of Detroit dudes, and I was always hearing about
they knew the whole story.
Yeah, this young white kid,
14,
that supposedly
FBI informant,
was running the black underworld, and I felt a lot of parallels with him because we both got busted young.
Yeah,
even though we had different circumstances, we both did a lot of time. And then he was in the black underworld in the streets. But, I played basketball, and I like hip-hop, so I hung around with a lot of black dudes, and I wrote books about black drug lords.
Yeah.
So there was this
There's
kind of
connection.
affinity. Yeah, so I pitched Sean Reck the story, and this was they had just taught, they had just went into production or announced the White Boy Rick with Matthew McConaughey movie. So he knew this, so he was like, oh, that's a sexy story. Because, in his eyes, he's seeing with the Hollywood movie, that's free promotion. Because a lot of these documentary productions are only a couple $100,000, whereas that Hollywood movie, probably their marketing budget was $1 million.
Sure.
So, he's seeing man, this is something, we might be able to hit on.
Yeah, piggyback.
So we go into promotion with that. And I kind of make a deal with him. I make a deal with him. I say, look, I'm going to give you access to all this stuff. You can base it, off my writing, all these articles I've done. But I said, I want you to mentor me. I want you to train me. I want you to fly me into the shoots. I want to,
want to learn,
sit in the director's chair. I want to learn to be a director. I want to learn the business.
I love that.
And so yeah, and he accepted my offer.
Because you could have easily have not have done that. You learned that and made that a training ground for yourself, Seth. And I think that's what's interesting about you is you've been in some real shitty situations, and you've been able, tenacious, relentless, whatever you want to wrap your arms around that, but you've made your situation work for you, which I think is really, we always try to say, on this program, Nightmare Success is, what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? What do? How do you adapt? You adapted, and you also found a whole passion for yourself that clearly at a young age, I can tell by everything I read about you, you were smart. You ended up in an area where you got caught. But then when you get into prison, you get your master's degree, you start writing all these books and doing all these things. I'm curious from the journey you're at, and you're just a few years younger than me. I'm 55. what do you think your biggest takeaway is from all this that you've been through?
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is, I mean, if you want something, you got to go after it, man.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to give you anything. Nobody's going to, you know, I tell people all the time, people hit me up on social media all the time, and they like have an idea and they're like, put me on.
Yeah.
I'm like, nobody's going to put you on, man. You got to put yourself on.
Right.
You know, you got to be proactive, not reactive. You know, if and everybody, sometimes you find yourself in life becoming reactive, but when you become reactive, you're losing.
Exactly.
You have to be proactive. You have to be ahead of the game. You have to see things before they happen. You have to be on that cutting edge. And sometimes, you know, I feel like I've been on that cutting edge, you know, a lot in life, you know, and sometimes I was on the cutting edge of the cannabis and psychedelic game, but I was way too soon, so I had to pay a hefty price. But, you know, other things, you know, like the true crime, you know, docs, like I came out, I was kind of on that cutting edge.
Good timing.
And now I feel like, you know, as a speaker, as a personality, as an influencer, I'm kind of at that cutting edge, like in the cannabis and psychedelic world, you know, because there's a lot of people in this world, you know, they might be CEOs, they might be part of these big companies, you know, or they might be this or that, but there's no substance. You know, I got the whole backstory. This is my culture.
That's what I love about your story, though, is that you don't wait for things. You do take action. And even if you don't know what it is and it's not something you've done before, you still step into it and learn it. Even to the point where you were getting the books before you got out to see how's everything work. You know, not a lot of people do that, but taking action and like you said, don't be reactive, go after it, step into it. That's good. That's a good tip, because I think so many people have talent. They have this whatever that's a passion of theirs, but they stand on the sidelines and watch everybody else play the game. You just stepped into the game and said, I'm in.
I tell people all the time, and this is what I told myself before I got out, because I saw people get out, and, you know, I saw people come back, or I saw them, you know, just get stuck in life. And these were dudes that they had dreams, they had goals, they wanted to do things, because me and my friends would sit around and we would share all this stuff, you know, as we got out, you know, and I had longer, so I had to do a lot more time. But I saw people got out that, you know, I really believed in, and, you know, real life would get in the way, you know, be it drugs, be it kids, you know, be it relationships, you know, be it, you know, getting back in trouble, violating, come back to prison, you know, be it finances, be it bills. And I told myself, you know, before I got out, I'm like, you know, I want to become a filmmaker. You know, I you know, eventually, you know, I mean, my ultimate goal is, you know, I want to be like a showrunner for a series, and I want to do, like, you know, Hollywood movies, like narratives, you know, fictional things. You know, my dream would actually to be like do some Marvel movies as a writer director. You know, so I think I'm setting myself up.
And you do comic strip stuff with, what was it called, Grind?
Yeah. I love comics. So, but my whole thing was, before I got out, I was like, I'm not going to let real life get in my way. A lot
Stay
of people,
focused.
They let real life gets in their way, and you can get bogged down, man. You can, and you know, like I say, I've got bogged down. I've got bogged down with bills. I've got bogged down with finances.
Everybody does.
I've got bogged down with relationships. But, you know, and everybody goes into shell sometimes. You know, I feel like I'm coming out of this shell that I've been in, like, the last 4 or 5 months, where I've kind of been bogged down with stuff, and it's kind of been affecting everything I've done. But I feel like I'm at the tail end of that. And I'm ready to go, man. I'm ready to go back in beast mode, you know. And a lot of times in my life,
I like that, beast mode.
Yeah, a lot of times in my life, you know, I get bogged down, but I don't let my stuff stay bogged down. I might get bogged down 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but I always bounce back. And
well, you know why I think that is, though, Seth, is you have something you're grabbing for. You have something that's a goal of yours, and you are wired a way to where you take action on it. Even if you get sidetracked, you get back on the track. There's an old Chinese proverb that says, get knocked down 7 times, get up 8. The reason you get up 8 times is because you have a reason to get up. And I think I see that in your life story, is you get knocked down, but you don't stay down. You get knocked down, you figure out, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to figure out, you know, how to continue to make it what I'm going to make. I think it's a fascinating, inspiring story, because for most people who would have been in your position, Seth, it would have put a lot of people in a fetal position, and it could have institutionalized you in that world. You could have come out and never have been anything. And what you did is you grew in that world. You became more of who you were internally, and you used that passion when you got out. And God knows what you're going to do here in the next 5 years, but it's going to be exciting to watch. Seth, man, I really appreciate you being on here today. It's just a cool story and sharing it with everybody. For people who want to find your stuff, is guerrillaconvict.com the best place to go? I mean, because it's got everything
that's
there.
My website. Yeah, I got a YouTube channel too under Seth Ferranti.
What's that?
Yeah, it's under my name, Seth Ferranti.
Seth, okay.
Yeah, and then I got social media. It's actually deactivated, but I'll be putting it back up. I just take a break from social media sometimes. Yeah. I get so much. I don't know. I found too, like the bigger I get or the bigger following I get, the negative comments, I get more negative comments.
Oh, yeah.
And I just, I don't like that. I take that, I try not to read it. Everybody says don't read it. But, it just, because I can't believe, because I'm trying to do so much and I feel like I've come so far. And then, like, somebody, like people say stupid
just
stuff.
Just a cheap shot.
Yeah, just like my college courses, like, oh, like I wish I went to prison and they could fund my college, my master's degree. But my parents paid for that. It's all based on falsities. And then, I get stuff like, just because I write about prison stuff or I write about drug lords and people say like I'm a snitch, and I'm like, the people are telling me their stories. I'm
exactly.
Not,
that's what I was going to say. This is not a fiction story. This is nonfiction.
But it's just,
But you know what? That's the cool thing about you, Seth, is for a lot of people, especially in the world we live in now, that social media stuff really eats people up, and you've got to be strong and stay strong with it to not, to let it get you. And I think, what you're doing and how you're doing it, man, stay relentless, stay after, because that's,
I just use it. I use it for promotion, but sometimes I just deactivate.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like dealing
I get
with
it.
But then as soon as I notch, Nightlife's coming out soon. So
it's
as soon
time
as
to
I
get
launch
on.
that,
promote.
I'll be cranking it up.
For everybody out there, and I've also got a book. It's called Nightmare Success, Loyalty, Betrayal, Life Behind Bars, Finally Breaking Free. Everybody, I love the likes, comments. If you want to find me at brentcassidy.com, I'm trying to build up the Apple reviews, so go there, give me a review. It helps promote the show. As I used to say to everybody I was writing from prison, stay strong, and I'll do the same. Nightmare Success in and out. Seth, thanks today. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.